Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Paporis, and Treasurer Higley. I'm Becky Mamich. I am the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. This evening, the Curriculum Department will provide a comprehensive breakdown of the 2023-24 state report card results for our district. This presentation will review the Euclid Schools' performance across key components and highlight goal areas we've identified to address and improve outcomes. Our focus on data helps us to guide targeted strategies that enhance student achievement and close gaps in performance. We'll start with an overview of the components of the report card. Then we will review the district's performance on the state report card, including the key components contributing to the overall rating. After each section, we'll share each District 1 plan goal initiated by each section. As a reference point, we've included a link to the Euclid Schools report card, which provides additional detail on performance measures released in the September 2024 report card. Let's look at the Ohio State tests, which are central to determining our achievement and progress ratings. These tests assess students in grades 3 through 8 in English language arts, mathematics, and science assessments in grades 5 and 8. For high school, end-of-course tests in subjects in Algebra 1, Geometry, Biology, American History, and Government ensure alignment with state curriculum standards. Our district's performance in these areas is a significant factor in our report card rating. Here's the overall rating system for the Ohio schools. As you can see, the overall rating is determined by 5 key components: achievement, progress, gap closing, early literacy, and graduation. Each of these is weighted differently toward the total score, with achievement and progress being the most significantly weighted. Please note college, career, workforce, and military readiness do not factor into the overall rating at this time. Achievement reflects state test performance and proficiency levels. Progress measures the growth students make year to year. Gap closing looks at how well districts reduce educational disparities across student subgroups. Early literacy focuses on K-3 reading improvement. Graduation tracks the percentage of students earning diplomas and graduating. These 5 elements combined give us a view of how our district supports students and prepares them for future success. The rating descriptions, as you can see here, provide a clear framework for evaluating school district performance. Schools that earn 4 or 5 stars demonstrate excellence by meeting or exceeding state standards, reflecting a high level of achievement and growth. Schools with 3 stars are meeting the needs of their students. Schools with fewer stars indicate areas where focused efforts and additional supports are necessary to drive improvement. In this context, our district's 2023-24 rating of 3 stars indicates we are meeting the needs of our students. We have highlighted the 2 areas of improvement, including gap closing from 2 stars to 3 stars, early literacy from 1 star to 2 stars, and we maintained 4 stars in progress, one of the components weighted more heavily. Our district earned a 3-star rating, which signifies that we are meeting state standards. Here you can see the weighting in the bottom right-hand corner for each component of the report card. Maintaining 4 stars in the more heavily weighted area of progress and improving in the early literacy and gap closing reflects growth and improvement from last year's rating of 2.5 stars. Moving from 2.5 stars to 3 stars should be celebrated and demonstrates that our strategic efforts and intentional district-wide planning, including professional development in tandem with the high-quality instructional materials adopted for grades pre-K through 12, are making a positive impact. Mrs. Cindy Urbick, the elementary curriculum coordinator, will now share the details on progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Mamich. Good evening. We will begin with the progress component. This remains a strong area for us as we maintain a 4-star rating in this component. This measure evaluates student growth over time, focusing on how much students improve regardless of their starting point. Student growth is assessed by comparing their current achievement to prior performance on Ohio State tests and measuring how actual growth aligns with their expected growth. Our students are consistently achieving growth rates of 1 year or more. This progress is reflected across multiple components of the report card, highlighting the effectiveness of our efforts. In year one, a baseline or a starting point is set using students' initial achievement on Ohio State tests, and growth targets are established accordingly. Expected growth, or achieving 1 year's progress, indicates typical growth. Above expected growth, achieving more than 1 year's progress, and below expected growth, achieving less than 1 year's progress. It is important to note that achieving expected or even above expected growth does not always lead to proficiency. It depends on the student's starting point. Sometimes it takes longer to get to the proficient. The district's overall value-added scores for the 3 consecutive years are used to obtain the progress rating. 50% of the most current year's overall value-added rating is combined with 25% of the prior year and 25% of 2 years prior. Euclid has earned 4 stars, indicating significant evidence the district exceeded student growth expectations. This table shows the progress scores by test, grade, and subject. It highlights areas of strength in English language arts, and it shows us the need for emphasis on mathematics and science. Mrs. Mamich will now talk to us about our mathematics goal.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Zerbeck. So in alignment with the state of Ohio's requirements, our school district developed a comprehensive plan to address the areas of need identified through a rigorous root cause analysis of our performance data. This process allowed us to uncover the underlying factors contributing to student achievement gaps and prioritize 4 critical focus areas we will share within the report card presentation. One area for improvement, as mentioned by Mrs. Zerbeck, and recognized by the district, includes the area of mathematics. Recognizing consistent challenges in math performance across grade levels, we are implementing enhancing curriculum alignment with board-adopted curriculum and providing professional development for teachers and administrators to strengthen math instruction and improve student outcomes. As you can see, this math goal spans 3 years, as does the plan span 3 years. Now to talk with us a little bit about the achievement results is Mr. Tim Rosenbaum, Assistant Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
The achievement component measures student academic achievement using each level of performance on the Ohio State test. And when we think of our strength and progress, and to some presentations in years past, progress will lead to achievement. And although we maintained 2 stars, we did make some significant improvements that we'll look at while still remaining within 2 stars. There are 2 areas within achievement. There's the performance index, which accounts for the level of achievement of every student, and then performance indicators, which are report only, which show how different grade levels performed at each state test. On the left side of this screen, you can see the performance index. Again, that is 100% of the achievement component rating. And then on the right side are the performance indicators, and we'll kind of drill into each, but just want you to see both sides. And again, the performance indicators are report only, but it shows us what % of students are performing at the proficient level. Our component percentage is used to assign the star rating. We are at a 55.6% performance index percent, which is a result of taking the performance index score divided by the maximum district performance index score. On the far right of the screen, the maximum district performance index score is a result of taking the top 2% of districts, and that's then the highest score. So you'll notice that that increased a little bit from last year. Our performance index score also increased a little bit from last year. On the chart to the left, you'll see each green arrow is over a column. To the far left is the achievement levels that a student can perform in. There's limited, basic, proficient, accomplished, advanced, and advanced plus. And then at the very bottom is untested. The percent of students within Euclid that scored within that particular achievement level, the weighted points for each one of those levels, and then the points we received towards that performance index score. When we compare this to the 23-24 report card, to the 24 report card, and especially looking at the gold box, we can see that we've advanced students from limited to basic, basic, proficient, proficient to accomplished, and accomplished to advanced. While they might not be huge jumps, they are significant enough to increase our points received, and as our progress component continues to remain strong, we expect to see these movements increase in years to come.
Where would we want that to be to reach the next level?
Let me get to that on the upcoming slide here. And before we get to that, looking now at the right side of the screen, again, this is report only. Here's where we see what percentage of students at each grade level and each assessment, where they actually scored for that grade level. So this doesn't go into the whole, it goes in, but as a whole to the other component. This is report only. But to answer that question, if you look at the bottom left of the screen, there's advanced plus, advanced, accomplished, and proficient. All 4 achievement levels count as becoming proficient, and that's what we would want to see, is we want to see students in one of those 4 levels. So to highlight how we are still in 2 stars, but we are making progress, last year we were the row below this, the highlighted row. We had 1.25 points. This year we ended up at 1.5 points because we increased to the next tier up of 2 stars. And that 1.5 goes into a weighted average for the district's overall rating. And Ms. Mamich will come back up here to talk to you about the instruction goal on our one plan.
As noted, we are making improvements, but we want to continue to improve in our achievement and our progress. So for another piece of our District 1 plan goal, we are focusing on instruction, and you can see the 3-year goal on the screen. High-quality instruction is fundamental to student success. We focus on supporting educators with evidence-based teaching strategies, fostering collaborative planning, and ensuring alignment with state standards to maintain consistency and rigor across classrooms. Therefore, instruction is another focus for our district. Mr. Rosenbaum will come right back up and share some of the gap closing results.
The next component is gap closing, and arguably the most complex. It has 6 different measures that make up gap closing. This is a highlight of our report card. We went from 2 stars to 3 stars. And gap closing measures the reduction in educational gaps based on student subgroups. There are 6 areas. We'll look at English and math achievement and progress for each specific subgroup. We'll look at graduation goals for each subgroup, chronic absenteeism, English language proficiency, and then gifted performance indicators. So you can see that there's different indicators within each of the measures. For gap closing, we received a total of 18 out of 54 points, which put us at a 33.3%, and we'll break down where those points came from. This chart looks at each one of those measures and their different indicators within those measures. To the far right, you'll see the points that we received, and then you'll see the possible points in the second most right column. You'll also notice that some columns have a zero, some rows have a 0 out of 0. For example, English learners. While we might have that subgroup, we might not have 2 or more years worth of data on enough students within that subgroup. So this does vary by district. 54 was the maximum points Euclid could have received. And one highlight on this slide, 18 points is more than we had last year. So again, that progress is leading to gap closing and will lead to achievement. The first measure within gap closing that we'll look at is ELA and math achievement. So this is similar to the achievement portion that I just spoke about. However, now we're looking at individual subgroups. The red dot indicates the individual subgroup's goal, and then the bar indicates the individual subgroups. Just to note, if you look at the left side of the left graph for ELA versus the right graph for math, the bars do move, so they're not just a straight across row. And then at the bottom, you can see what subgroups. The plus signs indicate where we received points for each subgroup meeting that particular goal. Again, you'll notice we have some highlights in ELA, but our math focus this is also indicating our math focus on the right. The second measure that we'll look at is ELA and math growth or progress. Again, the bar indicates the subgroup that we're looking at. The red line indicates the individual subgroups, the growth index of at least 2, and that's the goal for all subgroups, so you won't see it vary. We did get a point here for ELA. You don't see the red bar under math, again highlighting our focus for math in the one plan. The third measure is graduation, and the fourth measure, English learners. English learners is on the right side. This is just highlighting that we did not receive points, nor were we expected to in this particular category, and it's likely because we don't have 2 or more years of data for students within that subgroup. The graduation component on the left, the red dots indicate the individual subgroup goal, and the bar indicates the individual subgroup performance. You'll notice that we did not receive any points in the graduation rate by student subgroup, where we have received 1 point in the past here, and we'll address this through the one plan graduation goal. Number 5 is chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is a place that we should highlight on our gap closing report. We went from 47.5 last year to reducing that to 44.9%. So that's a huge increase, and this is also part of our one plan to address chronic absenteeism. For districts who have a baseline chronic absenteeism rate of 36.7% or higher, they need to improve by 1.1% in order to get the points in this category. And clearly we reached that and exceeded that, so we received our points for chronic absenteeism. And now I will call up Dr. Seifert to talk to us about gifted and the 3 components within gifted.
Good evening. The gifted performance indicator is broken down into 3 different sections. So we'll talk about each individual section and give an explanation to that to help simplify this, this indicator. So section 1, the gifted performance index, works just like the achievement component. The only difference for this section is that we're focused on the data about students who are identified as gifted. As previously stated, the maximum performance index is determined by the average of the top 2% of districts in the state of Ohio. Section 2 is gifted progress or growth, which works the same as the progress component. This shows how students are growing over a specific period of time. For example, this measures when students are making above expected growth, or less than expected growth. Section 3 is about identification and service. The areas where students can be identified are superior cognitive, specific academic ability, like math, reading, social studies, and science, creative thinking, and visual or performing arts. Each one of these 3 sections is worth 5 points. So it's either 0 or 5. There's no in between. So let's talk about the Gifted Performance Index. The chart on the right side shows the achievement of our students who are identified as gifted on the Ohio State test. For example, 52% of our students who are identified as gifted scored at the advanced level. 22.8% of the students who are gifted performed at the accomplished level, and 12.8% of our gifted students performed at the proficient level. One of our gifted services is called acceleration. A student who is accelerated can earn bonus points for the district. This is why we have the row called Advanced Plus. On the left side, there are 2 examples of acceleration: subject acceleration and whole grade acceleration. For example, if a student is a 5th grader and takes 6th grade math, they're now considered accelerated in math. If they're gifted and accelerated, they qualify for those bonus points. So for example, if they score in the accomplished range, they would actually receive advanced points. If they score in the advanced range, we would receive the points for Advanced Plus. They have to score at the proficient level or higher to receive those bonus points. Another example would be a 7th grader who's skipping grade 8. So we think of that as called grade skipping back in the olden days when I was in school. So now that student is taking 9th grade courses. So any course that that student is gifted identified, they could receive those bonus points. If they're not identified gifted in one of those courses, such as math, they would not receive the bonus points. So the state determines what their score is on the OST, if they're gifted, if they're accelerated, and then they could receive that bump up for the bonus points. The second section is called the Gifted Performance Indicator. And the Gifted Performance Indicator is called Gifted Progress or Growth. This section uses the value-added scores for the students who are identified as gifted. So as a review, this measure takes the scores over 3 years and weights them. This year's score is worth 50%. Last year's score would be worth 25%. And the prior year, 2 years ago, that score would be worth 25%. These weighted scores are summed together to equal the student's overall value-added score. We did earn 5 points for this section.
I have a question. Sure. For the gifted progress, does the state expect the student to advance 1 year like students who are not identified as gifted, or is there a larger or smaller, I guess, growth that is supposed to happen?
So typically, we want each student to grow 1 year. What we have to watch is where is their starting point. So for example, if a 2nd grader is starting at the early level of 2nd grade, growing 1 year puts them at the beginning level of 3rd grade, and that's fantastic. Would we want them to make more than expected growth? Absolutely. So for example, if a 2nd grader is starting below grade level, maybe mid-1st grade, and they only make 1 year's growth, now they're only at mid-2nd grade, but starting 3rd grade. So that means that that student is going to remain behind each year if they're only making 1 year's growth. So the goal is that we want students to make more than a year's growth, because that means they can always either make up for any gaps in their learning, or they can just keep moving a little bit further ahead.
So I'm gonna just add a bit, for
Yeah.
progress, kids are plotted along the line, so the kids have their own growth measure to
Okay.
make. So by and large, a gifted student would start higher up on that expected place. So they start their starting point is much higher, so they need to keep up that to get to whatever that next
So
level is.
if I'm understanding, using your example, Cindy, if we have a 2nd grader who is starting at a beginning 3rd grade level, at the end of second grade, we would want them to be at the beginning of a fourth grade level. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, so this section is a little bit more complex, so we're going to walk through it kind of slowly. So first, we want to look at how the information is organized, and this is all about gifted identification and services. The top line of the charts on the left side, written in red, have the title. The top chart says Superior Cognitive and Specific Academic Identification. The bottom chart says Superior Cognitive and Specific Ability Services. We're going to talk through the top chart on the left side. So underneath that red title, we have grade bands listed. So we have K through 2 grade band, 3 through 6 grade band, 7 through 8, and 9 through 12. So when we look at the K through 2 grade band, there's 2 columns. I can't read that. The percent identified and points. So as we travel down those columns, we can see that the percent identified increases and the points identified increases. We have 2% of our K through 2 grade band identified as gifted. That means we earned 9 points. And you can see that with the red oval that has that line circled. For the 3 through 6 grade band, we have 5% of our students identified as gifted. So they can be identified as superior cognitive or in a specific academic area. We earn 3 points for that. Our grades 7 through 8 grade band, we have 5% of our students identified. We earn 3 points. In grades 9 through 12 grade band, we have 3% of our students identified, and we earn 2 points. The total for gifted identification services, this whole section, the goal is to get up to or as close to 140 points. So you can see from this section, so far we've earned 9 points, plus 3, plus 3, plus 2 from identification in this area. So now we're going to look at the bottom chart on the left-hand side, and this is about services. So out of the students that are identified in the K through 2 grade band, 40% of those students are served. We earn 6 points for that. So in the 3 through 6 grade band, out of the students that are identified, 60% of them are served. We earned 8 points. In the 7 through 8 grade band, out of the students that are identified, 80% are served. We earned 10 points. And out of the 9 through 12 grade band, 60% of the students that are identified are served. We earned 8 points.
What's a situation that will cause a student not to be served?
Well, we do have students across the district that are not served. For example, in the elementary grades, I know that we have 1 or 2 students at the ELV. Their parents wanted them to stay there until they finish second grade, and then they told me that they're going to choose to send them to Chardon Hills come third grade. There might be a family that doesn't want their child to leave the homeschool, so they might stay at Bluestone or they might stay at Shoreview. So we have a couple students where the parents have chosen to leave their child at that homeschool. In the middle school and high school, it's a little bit different. We do have some students where the parents have decided to forego services. We also have some students that when they talk with their teachers and the school counselors, they decide not to take an honors course, maybe in math. Maybe they want to take it in ELA because they are gifted in that area, but math isn't their thing, so they choose not to take an honors course. So the whole goal is to personalize the student's educational experience. So we want to make sure that teachers are having those conversations with the students and with the parents as well as the school counselor. That way, as the students matriculate on up, we're personalizing that student's educational path as much as possible so that they're getting as much as they can out of their educational experiences.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is continuing on with the gifted identification and service. The chart on the left-hand side talks about creative thinking and visual or performing arts ability, identification, and services. If you focus on the grade band, this is very different from what we looked at before. The grade band is for students in K through 12. So currently, we have 1% of our students identified across K through 12. 40% of those students are receiving services. So we earn 2 points for the identification and 3 points for the services. We did improve in the creative thinking, identification, and service area this year. On the left-hand side, this is the last section for identification and service. The first chart has the title Economic Disadvantaged Representation Index. So we have 80% of our students that are identified in this area of economic disadvantagement. So we receive 20 points for that. 80% of those are served. We receive 10 points for that. And the formula to get that is a little complicated. But nonetheless, we're being very successful in that area. And that's the same with the underrepresented minority. We earn 20 points and 10 points. This amount of points we maintained from last year, so that's exactly the same. So when you look at the superior cognitive and specific academic ability, we increased in 7 out of the 8 areas, and the 8th area we remained the same. So we've made some significant growth in that area. So in this section of the gifted identification area, we scored 5 points. So that's exciting. I'm going to welcome Tim Rosenbaum back up to the podium.
So we're going back to our one plan, attendance is a third goal that we'll talk about on the one plan. We talked about reducing our chronic absenteeism rate, and we saw the effects of that, but we certainly want to continue that work. In our one plan, it says by June 30th, 2027, we will improve the attendance of all students across all grades in Euclid City by reducing chronic absenteeism by 12%. As Ms. Mamich referenced earlier, that's a 3-year plan, so that'll be over the course of 3 years to reduce it by 12%, and we're certainly on track to do that, so that's a highlight. And here's Mrs. Erbick to talk about early literacy.
Thank you. Okay. The early literacy component looks at how well students in kindergarten through 3rd grade are improving and achieving in reading. It includes 3 key measures. 3rd grade reading proficiency, which shows the percentage of students that score 50 or higher on the reading section of the Ohio English Language Arts Assessment. The second measure is promotion to 4th grade. This tracks how many 3rd graders move to 4th grade without being subject to the retention requirement of the 3rd grade reading guarantee. Students can advance by meeting the required score 690 or 48 in the reading subtest, by passing an alternative test, which we use iReady or the Terra Nova, or qualifying for exemptions such as special education plans, English learners under 3 years, previous retentions, or the newest exemption this past year of parent request. The third measure is improving K-3 literacy. This measures how well schools help struggling readers to catch up. It looks at progress over a 2-year period. Students identified as not on track are placed on reading improvement and monitoring plans, and their progress is checked the next year to see if they are at grade level or if they're on track. We had 47% of our students score proficient on the reading portion of the 3rd grade reading test last year. That measure is weighted at 40%, so the weighted percentage is 18.9, and this is an increase from last year. 100% of our students were promoted to fourth grade. This measure is weighted at 35%, so our weighted percentage is 35%, which is just slightly higher than last year. And then students that are identified as not on track in 2022 and moved to on track in 2023 was 18.9. This measure is weighted at 25%, so our improving K-3 literacy weighted percentage is 4.7. This is slightly lower than last year. When the weighted percentages are combined, they total 58.6. This results in a 2-year star rating, a 2-star rating.
I have a question.
That's okay, go ahead.
When is the third grade students tested to determine their proficiency for this third grade reading guarantee?
It's a great question. So they have several options. The first option that they have is the fall third grade reading test, which we just gave at the end of October. After that, they have in winter, we offer the iReady, which is an alternative way that they can pass. That's a computerized test as well. In the spring, after the state test, we offer the Terra Nova, which is a paper pencil. So we give them a different option to see if that will help. And then there's the spring state test. If students don't pass any of those, we ask them to join us at summer school, and then they have one more option to try to pass. So let's take a look at that, a little deeper dive into the improving K-3 literacy, because that was an area we didn't do as well on. These graphs compare fall 2022 and fall 2023 reading diagnostics, tracking cohorts of students as they progress. So, for example, you'll see the blue star for kindergarten under the 2022 chart at the top. When those students move to 2023, they are the first graders, so if you're following that cohort. And the first grade students at the top in yellow move down to second grade students at the bottom chart, and so on. It's important to note that in previous years, the diagnostics were administered a little bit later in September to allow recovery from summer learning loss. However, in 2023, the state changed their requirement for kindergarten that their diagnostics be completed within the first 20 days of school. So to align, we moved testing for all of our grades earlier, about 3 weeks. And you can see that in 2022, it was September 19th, where the 2023, we tested them in August. So there's about a 3-week difference. So despite that earlier testing window, we were able to maintain the number of students on track or grow them in each of these grade levels. So that lets us know that our students were showing resilience against that summer learning loss. That speaks to our Tier 1 instruction and interventions. This graph shows the movement of students identified as off track in 2022 and what percentage of those off track students moved to on track in 2023. And while we might not see the movement to on track, that doesn't mean that progress wasn't being made. Many of our students with above average growth may not reach that on track benchmark. It just depends on where they start. So if you go back to that progress, that starting point. So here's an example. So this particular student in the fall scored well below the benchmark in the beginning of the year diagnostic. And even with above average growth, if they make this well above average growth, here, this 36.1 points or higher, that still will land them in the red. They're making progress, but it's not enough to move them to an on-track level.
Ms. Urbick, is that 373? Is that their actual score that they scored?
This would be the goal that's set for them.
Okay.
So if they started at 299, this is for the mid-year. We want them to try to get to this because that will be that well above average growth that Dr. Seifert was talking about. When students are this low, if we don't meet well above average growth, their gap won't close. So the better we are at tracking progress for students and making sure that they're making this well above average growth, we check this in the middle of the year to make sure that they're meeting their goal. But along the way with those interventions, we're progress monitoring students and checking weekly or biweekly, depending upon how they scored in the beginning of the year.
And I know in our meetings too, that we have had kids that actually met this type example and still did not meet the proficiency measure on the test, yet their growth was tremendous.
Correct.
So they would stay in the red bar on the previous slide.
Correct. So that's why here, even though, because all of these kids initially started off off track,
Okay.
even though some of them didn't show that they turned to blue. Blue means you got to on grade level. So depending upon, like if we look back at this student, even if the student makes this well above expected growth, they won't get to the green yet to be on track, to be considered on track to move into that other section.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That, the reason that it's still in the 200s, even though they had that well above average growth, is because their peers are at a different point than where they were when they started.
Correct.
Is that correct? So the norm has changed in that time period.
Correct. So to be, and I don't remember off the top of my head what the beginning score was for this. This was a second grade student. It's like maybe I want to say 381. And so then by the middle of the year, they're expected to be at 393. And then at the end of the year, the green will be higher again.
Right.
Like because, again, that typical
Everybody's
growth.
growing.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So upon reflection of these early literacy measures, our plan is to continue to maintain our focus on improving the implementation of our core knowledge language arts curriculum, explicit instruction, and the interventions we've put in place. We will also be considering shifting that diagnostic testing date for grades 1 through 3 back to mid-September to optimize our outcomes. We believe that these efforts will help us to effectively support students in reading at grade level. Okay.
Can I ask,
Yes?
do we have an option to change that testing date? The state required it to be earlier this year. Is that going to change?
So the state requires that kindergarten they have to be tested within the first 20 days of school. So because our teams were already out at the buildings doing that testing, we said we were going to test everybody,
Okay.
identify like who was on track and not on track, and provide intervention. We have gotten to a place where we can use our end of the year data to start the year and still be able to put interventions in place already in August for some of our below level students, but push the diagnostic testing back a little bit.
So kindergarten might still have to take.
Kindergarten for sure has to.
But
Mhm.
the other students, you might go back to the September date.
Correct. And again, that's just because then they'll be in school for 3 more weeks, and hopefully some of that summer loss will show, they'll catch back up a little bit, and we'll show that progress again.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Okay, Mr. Rosenbaum is going to come talk to us about graduation.
The final component that contributes to the overall rating on the report card is the graduation component. The graduation component had a 78.5%, and that's a weighted measure. 60% of that weighted measure comes from the 4-year graduation rate, and 40% comes from the 5-year graduation rate that you can see at the table below. Here's a more detailed view where you can see the number of students in our 4-year graduation rate and the number of students in our 5-year graduation rate. Our 4-year graduation rate went down slightly, which again we'll address here in a couple minutes talking about the one plan, and our 5-year graduation rate went up slightly. Just something to note is this is looking back 2 years. Last year we implemented a graduation team, and we'll see the effects of that work. That team's working very closely at monitoring each student within a cohort and tracking them towards graduation. This kind of highlights what their work is. In order to identify the graduation rate, there's a ratio where the numerator is the number of students who graduate either in the spring or summer, and the denominator is the total number of students that are in that cohort. Essentially, what the graduation team works to do is try to get the numerator as high as we possibly can, while also looking at the denominator to make sure that we are reporting accurate numbers and make sure that we are tracking students in there. So if you look at some of those red arrows, we have graduates, including everybody in the cohort, but then it says minus cohort transfers out, and then cohort students reports in error. So the team works very closely with EMIS to make sure that we're not reporting anything in error. And one of those things that can happen is a student might transfer out of Euclid or withdraw from Euclid, but not get picked up or end up at another school. So we want to follow through with those students and really track where are they going. If they don't end up enrolling in another district, they're still our responsibility. So the team tracks that to really make sure that our denominator is accurate, and again, that our numerator is growing. In addition to that, we have transfers in that come from other districts that we want to monitor where they are within their graduation components, dropouts, following up with all students. Anybody who has ever been a Euclid student, we want to make sure that they are part of that denominator and that they are also then part of our numerator. And that's the ratio and a lot of the work that that team does. Again, when we look at our 1-star rating, anything less than 84% puts us at 1 star. To get to 2 stars then, there's a 6-point gap. 3 stars, 3.5, 4 stars to 5 stars is then a 3-point gap. So that gap gets smaller. Our goal, as we'll see in the 1 plan, will certainly put us into additional stars by the end of the 3-year 1 plan, and hopefully even sooner once we see the impact of that graduation team. If you turn to the final 2 pages of your packet, you'll see something that really Ms. Ganakis, Mr. Yane, and Mrs. Brown have been working on, along with other members, but they deserve a lot of credit here. We've been trying to develop a graduation progress report that is user-friendly, that is accessible to students, parents and guardians, school counselors, teachers. And what you're looking at on the first page are the 3 different components of graduation. The graduation requirements changed for the class of 2023, and they're a little complex in certain areas, and they're also part of that personalized learning. So graduation might look different for one student compared to another. On the front page, you're looking at the 3 components. The first component of graduation is the number of credits, and that's fairly traditional, but we do want to track what credits students are receiving and what credits they still need to graduate. For example, if you look at mathematics, there's 4 credits required, and students may obtain those at different levels, in addition to elective courses and other requirements up there, such as financial literacy. The second portion is demonstrating competency, and demonstrating competency can be done through the more traditional or common, which is passing the end-of-course assessment for Algebra 1 and for ELA 2, or there's alternative pathways which involve some of those industry-recognized credentials that we talked about last spring and how we're embedding those into core courses, as well as how they've already been embedded into CT programs. The third component is demonstrating readiness, and this indicates what seals the student has earned. Students are required to earn at least 2 seals, one being a state seal, and they both could be state seals, or one could be state, one could be local. And that's why you see the gray rows at the bottom of the screen there. Again, this is designed to be user-friendly. You'll notice that the green areas are showing that this student is on track for graduation and is making progress towards graduation and has met all 3 areas, met for sure the second and the third, and is on track for the first one. On the back side, or the next page in your packet, you'll notice that there's again, continued from the graduation progress report, are looking at students' career goals, any industry certification goals that would include some of those industry recognized credentials that we're putting into place, any extracurricular activities, and just really looking at what is the student's plans post high school and how can we tailor their education to meet those goals. This is accessible to parents and guardians, students, counselors, teachers through the backpack in Infinite Campus. So this is an action item under our graduation goal on the 1 plan. And it really highlights how we are trying to communicate this information so that everyone involved, student, parent, guardian, counselor, teacher, can track this information and that's user-friendly.
Is there a print version of this ever sent home?
There is, I don't know the exact timing of that, but I do know that the counselors meet with the students individually to go through this, and it probably happens, after those meetings.
And Mr. Rosenbaum, just to make it clear, this is the first year we're putting this clearly in place.
Correct.
As part of those measures, so we know there's gonna be a little bit of a lag. I know we're just starting, but do you know when we're starting with a student, like what grade they would be in?
I believe that they're starting to look at this with all students
Yeah, so we're
at the high school.
we're gonna
Yes,
be
every
s-
student.
So we'll be far more proactive, I think is the point.
Correct, and they have their cohort counselor, and this is information that, we need to be tracking, because again, to that personalized education point, it's gonna look different for all students. And to summarize and talk about our one plan goal for graduation is Mrs. Mamich.
Thanks, Mr. Rosenbaum. I think it's really important to note that the One Plan goals are really a collective, collaborative piece that we really are working very closely with student services on. And student services, and thank you for highlighting some of the work that goes along with this graduation data to improve our graduation rates, because it's very important, as we know, that graduation rates are a critical measure of success, and the district's efforts are centered on ensuring students will stay on track to graduate by providing these early interventions, personalized supports, and career and college readiness programs to prepare them for life beyond high school. So as we wrap up our 2023-24 report card analysis, we hope you have a deeper understanding on why the district has identified 4 focus areas: mathematics, attendance, instruction, and graduation, which serve as the cornerstones of our one plan. This strategic, data-driven framework is designed not only to meet state standards and expectations, but more importantly, to ensure the success of every student in our district. The curriculum department, Department of Exceptional Children, Student Services, Technology, collaborate to support the efforts to excel in those focus areas. Achieving meaningful improvements in student outcomes truly requires a united approach. We deeply value the commitment and contributions of our dedicated teachers, support staff, principals, district administrators, parents, superintendent, and board members. These partnerships and supports are vital to our collective success, and we thank you for your continued dedication to our students and their futures. Thank you for your time this evening, and we welcome any additional questions or thoughts.
In terms of that last goal, what would be, does that equate to if we're at 75%, does that equate to a 90%? Or are we taking a 15% of 75%? Do you understand what
Yeah, I
okay.
think I do. That is based off of our baseline, which would be last year's report card, which is 79.7%.
Okay,
And then over the course of 3 years, that would be adding 5% onto that, which
Thank
is
you,
why I
that's what
said
I-
it would put us into the above a 1-star rating moving forward.
okay, thank you. That would put us in like the mid 80% range.
Right.
Okay, thank
In
you.
Or
one
higher,
year.
or higher.
Yeah.
Oh, correct, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, in
That'd
1
be
year.
in one
Okay,
year.
thank you,
And would put us above the 1-star.
thank you.
Thank you. I think we have stopped your presentation.
Sorry.
Quite frequently.
Okay.
I can't keep going if I don't.
I want to thank the team. I know last year there's a lot of questions about Gifted too, so Dr. Seifert, thank you for coming tonight and doing a little bit more on Gifted. And I know sometimes I do more practice, I see the practice in advance, but this time I didn't have an opportunity. But we talked a little bit about showing how our one plan in the one needs assessment folds into Yeah, we're addressing math because our scores are not showing. So thank you for adding those parts. I think it really helps show all of us, the district, the community, everyone, that we're very purposeful about looking at this report card and how we can get better. Thanks.
Do we have any additional questions from the board?